All right, so we're going to get into the big review for the day, discussing Better Call Saul, which is the prequel spinoff of the Breaking Bad series, made by Vince Gilligan and Peter Gould. Here, it follows the character of Saul Goodman, which is an alias for the character of Jimmy McGill, which is played by Bob Odenkirk, the lawyer that people know from Breaking Bad, at his own show. Here, it kind of follows his events prior to meeting Walter White, prior to the events of Breaking Bad, even though at the beginning of each season it shows like a little bit of a black and white kind of introduction of what he's doing now currently. If you know Breaking Bad and what happened at the end of that series, I guess I could probably spoil it, I guess. I mean, it's already
spoilers for a decade-old series in Breaking Bad.
Yeah. Has it been a decade since the show's ended? Has it been that?
Yeah, it ended in 2012, right?
1 year.
Wow.
2013.
Oh shit! It's like 9 years.
Last season was split in half. Yeah.
Wow.
Oh, that's right. Yeah,
I mean,
so
arguably, I think you could argue this finale also feels like a finale to Breaking Bad right now.
Interesting.
Even though it's not as much.
This finale felt this finale felt very much like a great companion piece to El Camino, which was the Breaking Bad movie that came out
2019?
In 2019, yes.
2019, yeah.
Yes, and admittedly is kind of unnecessary. I say this, it's unnecessary, yes. But I like it.
Unnecessary, yes. Awesome, also yes.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. So with this series, I was trying to binge it, trying to finish it before today. I ended up getting like halfway through season 4, so I'm on season 4. But I'm gonna let kind of mainly Nathan and talk a lot about stuff about it since he's seen all of it. He's a big fan of it. He's finished all the seasons.
He's also, let's be honest, the way more articulate one out of the both of us in terms of talking about Better Call Saul.
Yeah, so I'm gonna kind of let him. Let him kind of talk about for the majority of it, and kind of give his thoughts. But I have seen quite a bit of it, and I'm going to be chiming in every now and then, kind of giving some of my thoughts on it as well. But yeah, Nathan, how did you feel about this last season of Better Call Saul, and kind of do you think it lives up to kind of the hype?
All right, hold up, Nathan. I will stop you. I hate to stop you, and I will let you finish, but I keep talking about like perfect seasons of television on this show. I talked about it with like Ted Lasso season 2. I talked about it with The Boys season 3, even The Boys season 2, which, rewatching that, I've kind of had some misgivings on it. But Better Call Saul season 6 is a perfect season of television. Not only just what the entire ethos of the show was, which was to show us how a two-dimensional character, how a three-dimensional person like Jimmy McGill becomes a two-dimensional caricature like Saul Goodman that we see in Breaking Bad, and how this show recontextualizes things about Saul as a character and just adds so much more weight and depth to every like little moment where Saul breaks the persona in Breaking Bad, and just shows how much of his life is a tragedy. It's a beautiful thing and a heartbreaking thing to watch. When this final season eventually jumps to the Breaking Bad timeline, which is something that, fanboys, as they do, they're constantly just saying, "Oh, I can't wait till they jump to the Breaking Bad timeline." And when it happens, it's not a celebration, it's a tragedy. It's a
jolt too.
It's a heartbreaking thing to see.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I would just say, in a word, it is still like, this show has always been good. I mean, Josh, you're just starting out, so you have that period of season 1, 2.
He's gotten past chicanery.
Yeah,
which is
no,
season 3,
you had that
9, which I think is
Episode 5, but so good.
Oh, episode 5, which I think is the best episode of the series. However, I would have to rewatch the entire thing in order to actually say what I think is the best episode. But Chicanery is in my episodes of greatest TV of all time.
But what I was saying, Josh, so you've watched the first 2 seasons of Better Call Saul. You generally, I would assume, reacted kind of similar to how I reacted, where I'm like, okay, this is interesting, this is good, but I don't necessarily, like, if I were hearing the hype, because I watch it all pretty much live because I'm a huge Breaking Bad fan, if I were hearing the hype that I'm hearing right now over this season, or just the way how I talk about it, if myself from the future told me, dude, this is the best show, I would be like, yeah, well, Fargo is out right now, and Fargo's doing
dude, if I'm being honest, the way you talk about it, it's so hyperbolic that if I didn't watch the show, the way you talk about it, because I'm in a group chat with you where you constantly sing the praises of the show.
Yeah.
And if I just kind of checked out after the first 2 seasons, I would write you off completely and write this show off.
Yeah, like a lot of people have done. But what I'm saying is we live in a era of, like, we want the fulfillment now. We want to see this now. We want to get to the Breaking Bad stuff. We want to get to, like, what we loved about that. But what most great TV shows do are teach you how to watch them. And Saul has done that at every turn. And not only do I think this was a perfect season of television, I think this was a perfect show. I think it's ultimately one of the most satisfying and well-made, well-crafted shows I've ever seen. And if you were just to take this franchise and just, Breaking Bad, which I know we all watched it, was like it's one of the Mount Rushmore shows. It's one of the most unique and wonderful ones.
It's a Mount Rushmore show. And when Better Call Saul premiered, Vince Gilligan and Peter Gould said to each other, said, fuck it, you want to do it again?
Yeah, but what's interesting about it is if you watch the first 2 seasons of Better Call Saul, the most exciting thing that happens in it is like, they stuck Kim in doc review, or they're overcharging for Q-tips, or the Sandpiper settlement's not going to go through, or like Chuck planted a phone.
But the fact that Gould and Gilligan managed to make the most mundane stuff like that exciting is still. And I'd even argue that that's before. It's like Jimmy McGill's whole interaction with Tuco in the second episode. At the top of that is some of the most tense writing, some of the like coolest shit I've ever seen out of either show or Breaking Bad.
Well, they've gotten so great at being able to tell a story that instead of the Breaking Bad idea of like, okay, what's the wrinkle? What happens next? How is he going to solve his way out of it? They've sidestepped the idea of a prequel where you know what's going to happen to the character. So if we show a character with their best intentions and we know it's not going to actually work out, there is a tension to it. Or like we watch scenes with Kim and Jimmy where we're like, God, I love this couple. I want them to really make it through. But we know that eventually he puts on his like Joker suit and becomes Saul Goodman.
Yeah.
So and we're like, where is the space in that life for her?
Yeah, which a lesser writer would have fucked this up so badly. And the way they handle it in this final season, where towards the back half of the season, we see both of them in the post Breaking Bad, post Better Call Saul timelines. They've gone their separate ways. And we see that they're both miserable. And we see how like just hellish both of their existences have become as a result of the events of this season. And towards the end, this becomes the Breaking Bad redemption story. This becomes a redemption story of these characters where I saw a tweet where one of the series finale posters came out and it looked like Gene Takovich, the black and white version of Jimmy McGill that we see in these flash forwards at the beginning of each season. And it looks like he's putting on that fluorescent red suit jacket on. And then after the finale, he's taking it off, which is such a beautiful piece of marketing and such a beautiful moment in the finale of the show.
Well, I think just
that is the only way I can talk about this show. I need to find another adjective because I will just be dropping beautiful so many times. They will create a drinking game and you will die.
Ultimately, what I was really struck by, and just first talking about the show at large, is how much it is a patient show, and how we will never get a show nearly as patient as this show, because
exactly it waits until season 4 to introduce Gus.
Season 3, but still, it
like was it like towards the end of season 3?
Beginning of season 3.
Oh, okay. Shit, I really need to rewatch this show. Yeah, but it waits 2 entire seasons to introduce one of the major players of Breaking Bad in a prequel to that show, which we've all like seen the, you know, all of these like prequel and sequel. We are in the age of prequels and sequels, and and we see how these other lesser things just shoehorn in these references to stuff you've known from before. And Better Call Saul makes you wait until season 3 to get into the nitty-gritty of the cartel stuff that you love from Breaking Bad.
But even then, it's still extremely entertaining as it goes on. It's there's not a bad episode of the show. Bob Odenkirk is such a great performer. Ray Seahorn is giving one of the...
And so much of that is owed to the level of talent to both Gilligan, Peter Gould, the directors that they hire, Bob Odenkirk, Ray Seahorn, Michael Mando, Patrick Fabian,
Michael McKean.
Michael McKean, who gives it. Did he win the Emmy for the whole chicanery thing?
Wasn't even nominated for for any episode of Better Call Saul, which is insane.
Nerds!
What a snub.
Nerds! We ride at dawn!
But what I find really interesting is season 6, in the way that it is about, we're reaching the finale, and whatever questions, whatever gaps we have in the Breaking Bad universe of like, okay, well, where's the room for this? What's going to happen to this person? We kind of can figure that out in ourselves, and they don't steer away from it. They steer right into it. And when they steer right into it, the show frees itself for 4 episodes that ultimately go into who is this man now after Breaking Bad has ended. Who, like, you know, we see glimpses of this side of Bob Odenkirk that is in the black and white timeline, and you know, we ultimately sympathize with him looking at him because we're seeing Jimmy's downfall right now, but we're not sure how good of a person this is. All we know is that he is a scared person and he's alone. And there is a genuine tension in those last 4 episodes, and a weirdness and a really coolness to the episodes. This show has the balls to go black and white for the last half of the season, and it has the balls to get less action packed, more subtle, and ultimately deliver what I think will be a Pantheon series finale. I understand I'm like really steering away from spoilers, even though you're here right now, Josh, but I feel like we're having just as good enough a discussion right now, just based off of what is here to come.
And that's kind of the bravest thing of this final season, because going into this last season of the show, we have like 3 major blind spots in the Breaking Bad timeline, and that's Howard Hamlin, who's played excellently by Patrick Fabian, Michael Mando, who's Nacho Varga, and Ray Seahorn's Kim Wexler. All 3 give absolutely Emmy-worthy performances in this entire show, but they are the three blind spots. And how they deal with those characters, it's incredible and a masterclass of television writing.
Yeah.
You're missing one more character who you don't have nearly the emotional connection to, but you just can't stop thinking about him when he's on screen or off screen. Is Lalo Salamanca, played by Tony Dalton, who you have coming up.
Yeah, fourth blind spot.
Yeah.
He came in late in the show, so
Yeah, like towards the end of the fourth
even
season, right?
Yeah,
Or-
which I'm ashamed that it took me so long to rethink of him because he's so amazing on the show. He becomes one of the most despicable villains in the entire Albuquerque verse.
He's kind of a Bugs Bunny meets like a crusader or like a swashbuckler, but a mixture of Anton Chigurh. He is easily my favorite Salamanca.
He is Tuco, but you give him the coldness and the charisma of a Anton Chigurh.
Yeah, he's wonderful.
So with this being being a prequel series, do you think it's, I guess, time now to kind of reevaluate? Because usually when people talk about prequel series, they talk about it in a negative light, of like, oh, what are you going to do? And how do you get kind of, involved with the series, knowing where a lot of the directions of the characters go? And it does have characters from the Breaking Bad universe that you have seen, not just only including Bob Odenkirk, but including Gustavo Fring, who's in this, who's Giancarlo Esposito, and then Jonathan Banks, who's Mike. And do you think like introducing kind of some of those characters like Mike, like Gus, do you think it naturally flows within the story? And do you think that now prequels in general are starting to be better than kind of they were maybe a while ago?
Okay, so here's what you're going to do. You're going to write your prequel story, but you're going to hold them to a higher standard. You're going to write them as if they're its own show.
Stick around.
And then you're gonna go from there.
I think it's an interesting question that you ask, is because a lot of it all depends on how you handle the prequel, because ultimately, and I'm not sure if either of y'all were a fan of, but I certainly wasn't, Obi-Wan, which came out, which I wouldn't say is necessarily a prequel, but in a lot of respects, a lot of the characters that they had already had predestined fates. Yeah, I mean, it is a prequel. Yeah, it's just
for me,
sequel to the prequels.
Yeah, at best, I think Obi-Wan is fine.
Yeah, but that ultimately comes into the hurdle of, we know what's going to happen to these characters, and you need to be a smart enough writer to be able to use that idea of predestined fates and tell an interesting story. And often it isn't what's going to happen to this character, it's, is this happening to this character? Why is this character like that? And Breaking Bad was an exception to a lot of rules, but Better Call Saul is an exception to so many other rules, especially when it comes to just IP.
Yeah, just in the case of Better Call Saul, I think a lot of the brilliant writing that was aided on this show was just molding a two-dimensional caricature of Saul Goodman and putting him and shaping him as a 3D character with Jimmy McGill, and slowly seeing that descent each season and making it that not comedy, which was the original pitch for the show. Originally, it was going to be a half-hour comedy around Saul Goodman, and instead they chose to do it this serialized hour-long drama in this tragedy of how does a man become so broken that he escapes into this flamboyant persona.
Yeah, but ultimately, they're like fucking Houdini with the writing on this show, because prequels can be straitjackets to the idea of telling a story where you have either have your characters slowly drown
it becomes
until they reach their spot.
Yeah, it becomes less about what can we do to make the story interesting and more about how can we get to the start of this next project. that came out.
And they found a way to take their time and find room to like really breathe and become their own show. And I've rewatched Breaking Bad in between this season of Saul's break, and it ultimately has they're like neck and neck, as not even just as far as quality, but just as far as how I'm able to view both of them. Because there are entire seasons of Breaking Bad that I cannot look at the same ever since Saul has come out.
So when, oh, I'm sorry, what were you gonna say?
Oh no, you're all good. I was curious what happened to Nick, but I'm assuming he's probably has his nieces and
Yeah,
nephews
I
and
think
whatever.
probably like family, probably loud in the background. I was gonna. So when
Yeah.
Better Call Saul was announced and that the prequel, how long was it till they were gonna announce like a spinoff after Breaking Bad ended? How long was it till they did that?
It was announced about the same, like within a couple weeks after it had aired, but it was always something in the back of their head. The co-creator Peter Gould created the character of Saul Goodman, and they even joked after the first episode. They're like, "I guess we'll see y'all on the Better Call Saul spinoff," just as like a joke of like a possibility. But I feel like these writers kind of challenge themselves with whatever the concept is, and they originally announced it, like Nick was saying, as a 30-minute like, we're going to have a comedian come in and they're going to be represented by Saul Goodman this week comedy. And by about the period in which they were halfway through season 5, they were developing season 1 of Better Call Saul. But I think you could ask anybody in the writer's room that, you know, if they thought that it was going to be this story of like two brothers and their war between each other, and one is good and one is bad, or hey, here is Saul Goodman's girlfriend, let's follow her for a couple episodes. You know, they really like went in the way of where the characters were. I believe when they started season 1, they didn't even know that Chuck was going to have this resentment for his brother. They thought it was just going to be Hamlin, and they've sidestepped that so well to where it feels baked into the season. Like they got through like 4 episodes that they had written, shot, and done, where they had no idea who the main villain was outside of this Hamlin guy is an obstacle.
Which is such a brilliant writing trick, just because just look at Patrick Fabian. He breathes white privilege. The firm that they work at is literally named Hamlin, and McGill, and a lot of that is just because he is one of the founders' son.
Kind of, so kind of with that question I had about. Oh, and by the way, thank you for the raid there, the Illuminati podcast. I'm sorry, I thought you were going to be on longer. If you were, I would have raided you. But hey, thanks for coming in with the raid there, much appreciated.
Hello, Illuminati. Welcome to your viewers. Welcome to our show. We are talking about Better Call Saul, aka one of the greatest television shows of all time.
So thank you very much.
I'm glad you're as hyperbolic about this, Nick, because I feel like we haven't talked.
I'm hyperbolic about it. I'm just not as annoying as you are.
That's fair.
I mean,
that's truly fair.
I mean, the viewers don't know, but Nathan and I are in a group chat where it's literally every third sentence it's either something about Saul or something about Top Gun Maverick.
Yeah, that's been about this year.
Yeah. So kind of with that, were you kind of one of those people? Because I know there was kind of a little bit of a negative reaction when they were hearing like they were going to do another kind of series after after Breaking Bad. Were you just like kind of like coming into the series with kind of low expectations, like it's not going to be as good as Breaking Bad? It can't be, right?
Not low expectations. I kind of hoped it initially. I mean, when I started it, when I hear Better Call Saul spinoff, I'm like, why do you touch perfection? Like, why must you like try and go back in this world? I had the same reaction with El Camino, and then season 1 hits, and I thought that season 1 was different. You really can't compare like season 1 of Better Call Saul to season 5 of Breaking Bad, but compared to the first season of Breaking Bad, I could definitely tell like the quality of filmmaking and writing was higher up, but it certainly doesn't have that same hook. Like you have to take a little bit to explain the premise to Better Call Saul. You could explain Breaking Bad as like chemistry teacher gets cancer, has to sell crystal meth, and that's a good enough hook. You're like
the
former con man.
The whole pitch of Better Call Saul. How does former con man turn into con man with a law degree?
But yeah, ultimately, early on, I wouldn't say that I wasn't hot on it. I thought it was still one of the best shows on TV. It just never was like one of the top 10 because it was still teaching me how to watch it. But when I came into it, I certainly was as skeptical as possible. And I think it was where you just finished off season 3, where I was so impressed by the writing and craft of it all. The Chuck McGill storyline in general coming to a close felt like they closed the door on half of the show, and that had all been pressure cooking so hard for so long. And then what they've done since then has probably been simply as satisfying, if not more satisfying, than their conclusion of that. What I ultimately think is one of the most interesting things about the finale, though, that I kind of wanted to discuss is so much of Breaking Bad is about how this person transforms into an evil man who cannot be saved. How do we take somebody who is inherently good and show you them turn evil? And Saul is a little bit more complicated than that because we have somebody who became, because of his environment, became a criminal.
Yeah, Saul
is
an interesting case in comparison to Walter White, because the more I've rewatched Breaking Bad, the more I've come to the conclusion that Walt had always had the capacity to become the monster that he is. He was just waiting on an excuse, like his cancer diagnosis. Whereas what's fascinating with Jimmy McGill is he was, because of circumstances, he was already broken bad. And he tried to go on the straight and narrow, and he tried to maintain his good heart until the events of the series just became too much. So he just retreats into becoming Saul Goodman.
And what they do past that point, though, that is so interesting is it becomes an ultimate discussion of like, can someone change their path and their fate? And the finale uses H.G. Wells' The Time Machine to sort of discuss that.
Yeah,
and becomes very, very heady.
Yeah, if anything, out of all 3 of the projects in this whole Breaking Bad universe, I would say this is the second most optimistic ending, next to Jesse Pinkman's ending in El Camino, because at the end of this, Saul, and I don't know if we want to get into spoilers with this.
I'm actually kind of sidestepping it. I feel like we're having a solid discussion without it.
We get a definitive answer to that question of, can a man who has done so much wrong and been a party to so much evil, can somebody like that find redemption or at least retribution? I may be a little drunk. I don't know if those are the same thing.
No. You're for sure explaining what is brilliant about specifically the last episodes.
Or not redemption, justice.
And I will say, if you guys, I feel like with a lot of people, they're going to want to rewatch Breaking Bad, and then they're going to want to rewatch Better Call Saul. I would, if you've already seen Breaking Bad.
Yeah, I would say do that in reverse order, except when you get to where the mid-season cutoff happens, stop there, watch Breaking Bad, and then pick up Better Call Saul.
And then watch El Camino, and then pick up Better Call Saul. But yeah.
And then watch El Camino, and then watch the last 3 episodes of Better Call.
Yeah, if you just feel like you want to have that that experience of maybe rewatching the Breaking Bad universe, because everybody's really had. I feel like the thing with this show is, for a lot of people, didn't scratch that same itch, because there is a certain level of action and excitement to Breaking Bad that Saul has never been about, nor should it have ever been about it.
Yeah, and also at their core, both shows are very different in their message and their execution.
So,
Yeah.
like,
You're good.
oh yeah, watching
No,
the
please.
show. Speaking about the two different journeys of the main characters, Better Call Saul, Breaking Bad. What do you think Bob Odenkirk does with the role of Jimmy McGill / Saul Goodman? That do you think it is as compelling as what Bryan Cranston does with Walter White, or you just think it's just different and different in what ways and following these kind of main characters and even you can bring in the supporting cast as well with discussing a little bit of that.
I would say both are compelling in very different ways, in both very similar and very different ways. Because both of Walter White and Jimmy McGill's like triumphant moments. With Walt, it's more on that like kind of Tyler Durden-esque incel wish fulfillment role where, yeah, I'm taking back my power and I'm like going
Yeah,
against the system. But
but
with
ultimately
Jimmy,
done in
but
a
but,
way more
but with
subtle
but with
way than
Jimmy, but with Jimmy, because we know what happens to him throughout the show, it has this tinge of sadness where we see that at his core, Jimmy McGill wants to be a good person. He just constantly keeps backsliding into this nature of his.
ultimately, I feel like Odenkirk will never have that like that recognition that
Mm.
Bryan Cranston had, even though he has
100%
always
deserves it.
been incredible
The man
in both
almost died in this
in
last
both
season.
shows.
He
Almost died
deserves a
in this
fucking.
season. He deserves a fucking. He's incredible. He delivers so much dialogue in such a fast amount of time. There is an unknowability to him
Mhm.
that works really well. You're really good at being able to read his face, but ultimately the show's performance that I feel like it is going to be the most remembered by people who have watched it is Ray Seahorn as Kim Wexler, who kind of
Who
functions as the Walter White style performance, where it's just like such a shot to the system. Where did this performance come from? Where like Odenkirk, we knew that he was capable of this, and he's only proven himself more to be capable of this. Ray Seahorn
Yeah, which could be
came out of
which
nowhere.
which that same thing could be said about most of this cast with Patrick Fabian, Michael McKean, Giancarlo Esposito, Jonathan Banks.
Well,
Every one
just
of those are like long time dependable. We know whatever script we give them, we are going to get their A game. But with Ray Seahorn, she was always like kind of on that fringe. And then with Kim Wexler, not only did Better Call Saul kind of overcorrect what so many people unfairly criticized about Skylar White in Breaking Bad. Ray Seahorn also gave one of the greatest performances of a single actress in any series ever.
one of
And
the most brilliantly and sharply drawn characters I've ever seen.
also, yes. And if Ray Seahorn doesn't win the Emmy for this season of Better Call Saul, nerds, we ride at dawn.
Yeah, yeah, she's absolutely
No,
incredible in the show. Yeah,
yeah. The thing is, like, man, she basically takes the torch that Michael McKean, or the lantern, I guess, that Michael McKean left behind, and
Oh,
really rolls
ah.
with it, and becomes that relationship in Jimmy's life that something needs to happen to it for him to become Saul. And you're in the middle of season 4, so you've already seen probably her. She has that one scene that I think she should have been nominated for an Emmy for in like episode 2 of season 4, when Howard talks to her about Chuck's death,
oh yeah,
Mhm.
and she's like, "Fair? You want to talk about fair?" And
yeah,
then she, like where his brother died screaming.
Brilliant.
Her delivery is so great.
yeah.
But she ultimately has become the performance that I think this show is going to be remembered for, even though I think Bob Odenkirk is incredible, and especially in the finale, and should get an Emmy as well. If I could hand an Emmy to just everybody in the cast of Better Call Saul this season, I would. But I don't think they'll let me do that. But I think Nick can agree with me on that.
I 100% agree with you. And if you say the word, we will ride to the Academy. at dawn.
We will ride to the academy. Another person who really blew me away this season and always rose to the moment that they give for him is Michael Mando as Nacho. Michael Mando really fucking killed it. I know you're probably in the heat of, and it's nice to talk about like you being now in season 4. Normally with a show, you'd be like, oh, you're still in season 4. There's a lot more to get to, but you're already seeing him plot against the Salamancas. That reaches its end, and it's very, it's one of the most brilliant episodes I've seen of television.
It culminates. It's this entire super tense game of hide and seek between Nacho and the eventual conclusion of that story, and this beautiful moment of catharsis that the fact that Michael Mando was eligible for this past Emmys category and didn't get a nomination should be brought up on criminal charges.
Yeah, because I'm at the part where like Gus is basically he's owning Nacho right now, basically. So that's some part.
Just literally owns him. It's not too different from the cartel, the neo-Nazis taking Jesse in Breaking Bad.
It's really not.
And it's interesting seeing Gus through that prism of like, yeah, this dude is really capable of some heinous shit. And that's another thing I kind of wanted to discuss, because I feel like for a lot of the show, and I love Giancarlo Esposito, he's kind of playing like the greatest hits album. This past season,
this final season, we get new layers to Gus that we didn't really see before in either Breaking Bad or Better Call Saul, which very much like the entire ethos of the show with Saul Goodman just adds more layers of tragedy to his character.
Yeah. There are some scenes with Giancarlo Esposito this season that I won't be able to really get out of my head when I rewatch Breaking Bad again. I wasn't able to for the little bit that I did watch it after that episode. There's a scene literally where he has just a wine sommelier pick out a wine for him, and he just looks at it with a lot of longing. And you're like, oh, wow, this is one of the best performances I've seen out of Giancarlo Esposito. And it's
also one of the thing about it's also one of the horniest scenes I've ever seen in either show, Breaking Bad or Better Call Saul.
Well, it's the thing about Better Call Saul where you're able to just be like, yeah, man, I just finished season 3. It was really intense, man. The craziest scene was when a dude pulled a cell phone battery out of his pocket and threw it across the room.
Can we speak about moments of like this show, Better Call Saul? Because like as opposed to something like Breaking Bad, I don't mean to always kind of compare it to Breaking Bad, but
no, you should. They're in discussion with each other.
Even watching the show and rewatching it recently until to get ready for this final season, even I couldn't help but compare it to Breaking Bad. And I think the writing lends itself to that, but not in a detractory way, the way a lot of like sequel and prequel stuff tends to do. Because I feel with a lot of sequels or like requels or stuff like that, they just constantly fall into the trap of, hey, remember this thing from this other show? Look at how awesome it is.
Yeah.
And this show, they say, hey, remember this from that awesome show? Let's deep dive into why they ended up that way.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a scene where you see the security of Giancarlo Esposito's house, and once you see the security to his house, you look back at Breaking Bad and you're like, Jesus Christ. Walt thought he could fuck him with a revolver.
Walt never had a fucking chance.
Yeah.
But you were trying to say, Josh?
So I was just saying, with this show, it doesn't seem like Better Call Saul has maybe that same cultural impact that Breaking Bad did. Because I guess when Breaking Bad, when it came on, first of all, it started off great pilot episode where it had Bryan Cranston in his tighty whities and he was driving an RV, and it just started off kind of wild.
That first episode had one of the greatest hooks in television ever, and also I think also you gotta consider the era in which both shows aired. I think
that's really what I was
with Breaking Bad, that was still airing in the height of serialized television, of cable stuff, watching stuff week to week. Which, although Breaking Bad did respectable ratings, it also came at the start of the streaming era with Netflix, where the first 4 seasons were available to watch streaming all the episodes at once. And that's when it became the cultural phenomena that it did. And that's why season 5 is still remembered to this day, why it got the ratings it did. And
well, that's the thing about
and whether deservedly or not, Better Call Saul came out several years later. It was like a prequel series. It already had that almost impossible hurdle of following up one of the greatest television shows of all time. But unlike Breaking Bad, Saul is not structured in a way that appeals to a casual audience.
I agree, and I also disagree. Well, in a lot of ways, what you're saying is right. It is the different era of television. The first episode of Breaking Bad and the first season, Breaking Bad is one of those rare shows where it grew more audience as it went on. And around season 3 is when they started getting the episodes on Netflix. And then a lot of heat built up around season 4. And it was always considered and won Emmys, but never was one of those ones that people were talking about. It wasn't until Martin Thomas told me to watch that show.
It was a show that was, it was winning Emmys, but it was like, who the fuck is watching Breaking Bad when it was winning those?
But then there was a decent gap between season 4 and season 5. Everybody caught up, and it got more viewers than ever, became a cultural phenomenon, and basically in a lot of ways was the first show to ever really get that streaming boost that we no longer see. I mean, the closest thing that we could say we see that streaming boost from is like a show like You, where it aired on Lifetime, but now like Netflix has just taken that show and it is a Netflix show now. Or like Cobra Kai, where that goes on from another streaming service to a more popular streaming service. But it's not quite the same. In a lot of ways, Saul is still show running made not for streaming, really. I mean, it is a very binge show, but it's not a show that is made to have the entire season digested all at once, and then you process it later on.
Exactly. It's a show that I think benefits watching week to week, but you also don't really lose anything binging it all at once.
Same with Breaking Bad. It's one of those few shows where the moments between things, and I think it will never be the show that Breaking Bad was, just because no show I think ever really can. I think Game of Thrones sort of had that moment where it could have had the brass ring.
If it ended at season 4, yeah.
And then there are a couple shows that have really had that water cooler.
Yeah, it's like if Dexter ended at season 5, yeah.
Yeah. But what I'm seeing a lot of
ended at season 0, yeah.
What I'm seeing a lot of right now are people like you catching up on it from the beginning, and I'm feeling like a lot of steam building around this show. And it's kind of getting a second life as it's reaching its ending, and people, enough people will just be like in a room, whisper closely, Saul's a little bit better than Breaking Bad, and people are like, nah.
We kind of see that with, just to bring up a recent example with Marvel and Disney, we see that with Daredevil, with all of the hype of him showing up in Spider-Man No Way Home, his show showing up on Disney Plus now, him eventually going to appearing in She-Hulk. Everyone's kind of looking at his show in kind of a different light now versus when it was airing on Netflix, where it was really huge for its first season, and then the next 2 seasons happened and nobody really talked about it then.
I also just think a lot of people were, I'll say understandably, but I don't understand it because the show's always entertaining, a little bit frustrated at the pacing of Saul, because Saul does not give a fuck about what your expectations for its pace to be are. I remember this is just the nature of week to week television. I remember around episode 4, somebody was like, man, they don't have enough story. They're wasting their time right now. And they literally, like, the balls of them. They had episode like 5 of this season be an episode entirely about waiting for something big to happen. Like they just had a ton of people, no matter what, just keep echoing the lines of like, this whole thing's just taking too darn long. And then you get this huge explosion of events. And, just talking, like Breaking Bad will have the head on the turtle, and it will have the dinging of the bell, and then the explosion. There are moments like that in Saul.
The shootout with the twins, with Hank.
Yeah. There are moments like that in Saul, but like, when you look back at them, they're more symbolic. Like the candle in Kim and Jimmy's apartment, or the lantern in season 3, and all throughout the show. I mean, you watch season 1 of Better Call Saul, and there's a scene where the nurse is like, he could light his entire house on fire. He's a danger to himself. And, weirdly, now that I'm realizing it, just looking at it through that prism, a lot of people kept telling Jimmy that he's just, he's a criminal lawyer. He's the sort of person that only guilty people hire. And a lot of people kept telling Chuck that he's crazy and he's going to kill himself in his house. And they both decided to just steer into that.
Yeah, and it kind of reminded me of a quote I read about like European prison, which Josh, you and I talked about when season 3 of Atlanta premiered. And it was like, if you treat somebody like an animal, how else do you expect them to act? Which I think is kind of like the biggest tragic thing about Jimmy McGill as a character in both Chuck, where their entire lives they've been told that, you're nothing but a scrub. Chuck, you're insane. You're probably going to kill yourself in a couple of years. And what eventually happened?
Yeah.
Another character to view through that same prism is they're always in discussion with each other just from the way how they are framed and everything, but Nacho Varga and Jesse Pinkman, where Jesse Pinkman comes from a high class household and he chooses this life of crime. And then you have somebody like Nacho Varga who comes from a lower class world. He like brings up being friends with Tuco Salamanca in like high school, which could you imagine being friends with Tuco just in general? The level of tension that you would have. And then, he slowly makes like it.
2 + 2 is 6. Bitch.
You just you think about like the way how his father is very similar to Jimmy's father, where they both are like, small store owners who are super honest people.
Yeah, they're both salt of the earth people that are way too good for this world.
Yeah, it's I love how the show discusses nature versus nurture and being a product of your environment.
Yeah, with kind of the core thing about this show, me being in season 4 right now, seems like relationship between Jimmy and Charles, and kind of seeing that relationship. Do you think with that kind of relationship, was it that, just to get your opinion on the dynamic between the two of them, was it really that Chuck really liked being the kind of top brother, and then he liked Jimmy down there? So as long as Jimmy was in his place, he was happy with that.
100%. It's like every single moment in the show where Chuck is being kind to Jimmy, it's always in a place where Jimmy is very inferior to him.
Well, they both have conditional love for each other. Like I'm sure that Jimmy is fine being the the person who his brother is able to just be like, like my scumbag brother is able to introduce him like that at parties, and Jimmy's mostly fine with it going on. And even when he wants to do better, this resentment is curdled inside him. I mean, you've seen enough scenes with Chuck, obviously, having closed his arc, that you can see that there is a level, even outside of like the law is sacred, that he says, where it's like, well, you resent this dude because he makes people laugh and people generally like him.
Yeah, which is a thing that I love so much about the character of Chuck McGill. Is like, you could read it as he's just resentful because everybody seems to like Jimmy. And a moment where that stands out is like sometime in season 3 where you flash back to pre electromagnetic hypersensitivity Chuck, and we see Jimmy come over for dinner, and Chuck's wife is just laughing at every single joke Jimmy tells, and then Chuck tries to do the same and crickets.
Yeah. But you can also argue the same thing about Jimmy when Chuck falls ill, where Jimmy has multiple moments where he could have put him into mental health care, actually looked out for his brother in a way that would have been meaningful. And I don't think Jimmy knows that he's doing this, but he's keeping him in his place.
In a brief moment where with the doctor who's played brilliantly by Clea Duvall, where she proves to Jimmy's face that everything that's going on with Chuck is 100% in his head. And Jimmy chooses to not fucking do anything about it. Chooses to indulge his brother in this illness.
Well,
one thing that you go.
I was just gonna say, I think one thing. I mean, I guess yeah. I mean, you could read it as Jimmy putting with like he liked being the guy that Chuck could rely on and being that person that was there for him, for all those years. But also, I mean, that was a big task, though. I mean, doing all that stuff for him every day.
It's not malicious at all. I think it's
exactly prior to
he likes being neat.
Prior to the eventual Breaking Bad timeline, I don't think any of Jimmy's actions are intentional. No, let me rephrase. Prior to a certain episode in season 3 that I do not feel comfortable talking about, since we're not in a spoiler discussion, I don't think any of Jimmy. Season 3. Oh, he's past season 3. Okay, prior to the insurance scam that Jimmy pulls, I don't think any of his schemes were intentionally malicious towards Chuck. I mean,
you could argue some of them blow up like a stick of dynamite because manipulating those numbers on him. On its surface, it doesn't seem like much, but to Chuck, that was everything, and he ended up in the hospital.
Yeah, but I read that more as Jimmy wanted to help Kim versus hurt Chuck.
Oh, for sure.
Oh, I agree.
Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah,
100%.
We can't. We can kind of judge intention versus result, but.
One of the things that's interesting, though, that I'm sure you're seeing. The
brilliant thing about the show that you have so many ways to look at every single thing that characters do.
Well, it's granular television, but one of the interesting things that I can talk to you about right now, Josh, is the, you watch this show and you know that Jimmy is going to go bad. You know that Jimmy is going to fuck up. You know that he's going to be Saul Goodman. You know that ultimately he is going to be that chimp with a machine gun towards the law. But every time Chuck is like, he'll never change. You're just like, well, shit, man, why you got to treat Jimmy like that? The fact that the show is able to do that, have a character tell you the right thing.
And also knowing what we know about Saul versus and compare what we know about Saul Goodman versus what we know about Jimmy McGill, and as Chuck is giving that, it would hurt less. It would hurt more if Chuck weren't such a sanctimonious prick about it. But motherfucker, you didn't help.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's one of those things where it's like, well, he leaned on him until he pushed back against the rules of society just to be able to survive. And because he did that, he created the monster of Saul Goodman. Not fully. I think there are other people who along the way helped create it, and it's not like Jimmy isn't. Jimmy makes these decisions himself, so you can't act like he's just an innocent in the midst of all of this, but he is certainly one of the more relatable characters of either universe.
Also, Saul straight up starts out with portraying Jimmy as a con art. It is like that whole big moment with the two skateboarders pilot episode. They 100% show that he's got a little dirty in it.
Yeah. And
something that's interesting looking back at that. You can go actually.
Oh, okay. I was going to say this last thing about the relationship. It's, you obviously get that Chuck has a, precedent to believe, Jimmy. I mean, it's his brother. He's seen him fuck up over time and time and time again, especially when you see early on when he stole the money from the store that helped, that when his father, got into debt because of that. So that was a big thing.
Yeah, but the figures that Chuck presents versus, the age Jimmy would have been, it's a little far-fetched. And how much of that is just Chuck's own bias against his own brother?
It's just Jimmy didn't help, but like in Chuck's mind, Jimmy certainly thinks that every cent that was stolen from that store was Jimmy, which we see in that same flashback is not true.
Yeah. And you see that kind of that. And then also a really sad moment was, in the hospital with the mother. And then the last thing she ever says is the name of Jimmy, you know what I mean? And Chuck is right there. And it just kind of reinforces that thing of everybody just kind of wants Jimmy. Everybody likes Jimmy. And here's a guy that has worked hard his whole life. He graduated high school at 14, they said. And then he went on to, have this successful career and build up this successful law firm and everything like that. But, Jimmy can just get by through life. And we kind of, everybody, I guess, kind of knows guys
Jimmy's
like that.
Fuck up, but everybody likes him.
That just kind of skates through life.
So much of the the thing about Chuck is Chuck has worked so hard to get this profession, built a law firm up with somebody else, and then he sees his brother who slips and falls through life, quite literally, and has what he sees no real consequences. And the one time he's nearly in shit creek, which is interesting to view through the prism of this season, the whole Chicago sunroof where he shits down a dude's windshield, which is awful, but is the moment that Jimmy is nearly labeled as a sex offender and sent to prison, and Chuck managed to get him out of there and had him work in the mailroom, and he plugged away and he became an attorney. And there is no reason to believe between the years of 1992 to 2002 that this dude has done anything wrong. And now rewatching the show, in the first episode, Hamlin, according to Chuck, wants Jimmy to not practice law under his own name because he finds that it's competing business affairs. And that infuriates Jimmy so much that he starts that con again and he becomes a con man again.
Yeah.
So you can in a lot of ways, I mean, it's not every action that he does, but Chuck manages to find a way to create this monster. I wouldn't say monster. I feel like calling Saul Goodman a monster is a little too far, but this shitty human being.
He's more like a Renfield to Walter White's Dracula.
Yeah. I mean, Jimmy worked hard, in the mailroom, put himself through the prestigious American Samoa University, which you're a graduate of.
Land grabs!
Yeah.
I shit you not. I went to a donut shop and somebody thought I was a law student and tried to,
go land.
You said somebody thought you...
But...
Oh, okay.
Somebody thought you were a law student.
I went to... There's a place called Ken's Donuts that does late night donuts and legal advice. And when I went to go buy donuts, I was wearing this sweater because it was cold out in Austin for the 2 days that it is. And the lady up front was like, "Hey, you're a lawyer?" And I'm like, No. And they're like, "The law student." I was like, No, it's just a t-shirt from a TV show. And she's like, "Oh, I was going to offer you a job. Do you know how to make donuts?" And I'm like, I don't want a job here. I just want a dozen or 6 old fashions and a couple apple fritters.
Oh, wow. You could have been like Jimmy, man. Could have conned your way into a job, man. Could have been representing people.
My way into having a law firm.
Conned your way into working at a law firm and then eventually becoming the lawyer to a criminal kingpin.
That is the true fork in my life. Maybe I could make rent that way.
You think it's a kind of a similar dynamic of Jesse and Walt, kind of Jimmy and Chuck? It's kind of like a similar kind of dynamic there.
Yeah, it certainly has shades of that for sure. Especially just comparing Walt to Chuck, because they both have that pridefulness. But I think ultimately, Walt would be I feel like Chuck and Walt would probably get along for 2 seconds. But if Chuck knew anything about Walt, he would be like, the law is sacred. But they have that same similar level of pride.
they both have an indignance about them that turns into just prideful boasting that feels like overcompensation with boast characters.
You know this because I know that the internet it doesn't shut up about this, and I feel like this is something that people really like. It's crazy that we discussed this season where this would be like your Luke Skywalker comes halfway through Mando thing, but Walt and Jesse return this season, and it's really artfully done how they appear, and they don't try and act like they're like scenes missing from Breaking Bad that could clue you in on the whole picture. Like that's a pretty cut and dry item. It just feels nice, but they use scenes with Walt to mirror scenes with Chuck in ways that I mean are always present in the show. The first time they meet Saul Goodman in Breaking Bad, Walt's like, "Why don't we get a real lawyer?" Which you can just see Chuck up in his grave being like,
"You don't want
a
criminal lawyer. You want
a criminal lawyer."
All right, so I hate to do this, but the jet lag is really starting to hit, and I just really gotta put my final thoughts in before I hop off this stream.
Okay.
This final season of Better Call Saul, the entire show, this is cinema. 10 out of 10. We're not killing Badger, yos!
All right. That is awesome. Man. Well, get some rest, Nick. Take care. I'll see you.
I appreciate
next week.
Rest up.
I'll see you next week.
Brother.
So I want to.
Yeah. 10 out of 10 recommend for you, man. Like you're gonna love it.
Do you have any negatives for the show? I know we've been praising the show a lot. Do you have any negatives?
I mean, it's tough because I'm like, this is my show for me. I mean, there are elements. I mean, if you got to get so minuscule with it. There is that finale to season 1 where what's his name? When Jimmy drives away, and it seems like he doesn't take that job over at Davis and Maine, or doesn't even have the meeting. He just drives away from his life, and it leads you to sort of believe, oh, he's going to become Saul Goodman right away, and that feels incongruous with season 2. But they kind of course correct that in their own way. And outside of that, there's some moments where the show can feel like a very huge amount of footnotes to Breaking Bad, but ultimately, it's just such an entertaining, satisfying show that like even any of your criticisms about it, when you stack it up against like any other show on TV, you're like, well, even your best days are better than like some of the most well-crafted shit on TV.
Right.
And all the performances are obviously just fantastic. And it just keeps getting better. And I'm rewatching I just finished rewatching season 2 just today. And season 2, I think, was probably my least favorite season for a while. I kind of went like, there are some episodes in season 1 I go back to, and I'm like, oh man, this is like the Mike episode is just phenomenal. And season 3 is incredible, and season 4 I think is also great. Season 2 hits way harder after season 6, and I really like. I'd have to get done with my rewatch before I can be like, maybe this wasn't that great. But the fact that I have to put it under a magnifier to be able to find it just is sort of indicative of the show.
And what do you think is the weakest season?
I mean, that's tough for me. They're all good. There's really like, I think season 1 and 2 are maybe the weakest, but they're both like neck and neck, and they're both still trying to teach you how to understand the like language of the show, like a lot of great shows are. And revisiting them, I'm not looking at it like, man, I'm in the trenches right now, let me wait for the good shit. I'm just like, oh shit, man, had Jimmy just done this one thing, he would have been out. And like this one action that he did spiraled out in this whole thing, and then I'll meet a character and I'll be like, oh man. I mean, some of the characters like Nacho and Howard and Chuck and Kim, and every character now, when they show up on screen, you get chills just by how their stories have ended.
Yeah.
It's the same way with Hank in Breaking Bad. I mean, you could be like, yeah, the worst season of Breaking Bad is season 1, but when you rewatch it, you're like, oh shit, remember when it was this simple?
Yeah. And it just keeps getting worse and worse and worse. Yeah.
Yeah, you're just like all these decisions. I mean, you're like, remember when this was just
Yeah. And
like,
it's just crazy. I mean, you know, to watch people's lives, it's like watching it on screen. It's like, just make this good decision and just make this and go here. And then, but it's like you speak about the fork in the road. It's just like, you know, it's just like they go the completely opposite direction. And it's like, fuck, you know, don't do that.
later on, Mike has a speech about the bad choice road, and he's like, you make one bad decision, and then more bad decisions are going to find you because you already put yourself on a bad choice road. And so much of the show is just about those decisions. And I think the finale is really brilliant because it highlights like, can you change that in any way? I mean, because it sort of understands what's narratively kind of lacking with the prequel is like, well, all this shit has gone wrong, and instead of literally taking a time machine, it's like, is there anything you can do to make your life right? And in some ways the answer is yes, and in some ways the answer is no. And it's fucking beautiful shit.
Yeah.
Like that it's not like Breaking Bad in the sense that like Breaking Bad has like 6 different endings, you know?
Mm.
Like you could say it ended with Ozymandias in some ways. You can almost just take a break right there. You can say it ended with Granite State, where Walt's, you know, just sitting in a cabin alone with all this money, and he's just paying some guy to just be able to socialize with him because he misses people. Or you could talk about, you know, like the ending Felina, the actual ending with the gun in the trunk, and they all are very different endings. Saul does have a couple different endings to different things, but it has a definitive like final place, and that final place is also like, this isn't just the ending of Saul, this is the ending of Breaking Bad again. And the fact that they were able to pull that off is wild to me.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah.
It would be, honestly, that would be the thing that this is its own discussion. Now, just thinking about this, that like Marvel kind of has to pay off now is like, okay, so you had this entire Infinity Saga, it's all done. What's interesting right here? Like, what do we have left? Who are our characters that we care about? Who can we get them to care about them, and can we make the next big thing as serious? And we're kind of all in this place in Marvel, and I hope Call Saul season 1 and season 2 we're like, what is this thing about, you know?
Mm.
And then we eventually get that payoff, but it's interesting just as far as IP works, its own relationship with each other. And I hate talking about things like they're, you know, just pieces of property, but that's really what I find to be the biggest like success and miracle. It feels like an ending not only to Breaking Bad, not only to Better Call Saul, but that entire era of like, here's usually a problematic white dude who makes bad decisions. The white anti-hero era of fucking television, where we got Don Draper and Walter White and Tony Soprano. And I think of those endings, Saul Goodman had the best one. But yeah.
Wow. Nice. So are you done with you think they should be done with the Breaking Bad universe? That's it? Done? Or do you think they can still go back to the well, or what?
I'm interested if they're interested, is kind of my stance on it all. They have pretty much been definitive of like, all right, well, The Godfather 3 already came out and that didn't really work that well. So we're kind of done with this and we kind of want to do our own thing. And it feels, in the way how it feels, like they're done with it. But, you know, if they decide like, all right, Better Call Kim, like that's our next show, like, you know, or whatever, a Gus prequel,
Gus
you
prequel.
know.
Mm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I feel like the ship's sort of sailed on that. I think there's only how many years you can be removed from Breaking Bad where you're just like, okay, yeah, I still buy Gus as like a young man.
Yeah. Breaking Bad babies. Yeah, you can do that a little bit.
Yeah. I
Uh,
mean, the thing about Saul is like nobody really forced this out of them. Nobody forced El Camino. Nobody forced any of this. Their whole idea was just, you know, hey, this is we just want to reteam with these writers. This is the best creative collaboration we've had in a long time, and I think we have more people in this world, which is kind of the thing that made Breaking Bad so apart. Is like it really did have a world. I mean, a lot of shows just have characters, but Breaking Bad had like this Albuquerque setting, and it was just so different and unique from everything. And they've really fleshed that out in this show.
Yeah, interesting point, because it, like maybe you think of a lawyer show or this type of show being like L.A. or something like that, or kind of sunny kind of thing like that, instead of like Albuquerque,
Well,
New Mexico. Yeah.
yeah, Breaking Bad was supposed to be in like Southern California, and they decided to do Albuquerque tax write-offs, and you can't even imagine the show not.
So yeah, I mean it's a definitely unique setting. Yeah, it's definitely unique. I mean, it worked out because I mean, aren't they got a statue, right, of Jesse and Walt in Albuquerque?
Yeah, they have a statue of Jesse and Walt. I know Mike, or that, what's the actor's name? Jonathan Banks just lives in Albuquerque now and like gives people advice on which apartment. He's like, so what you're gonna do is you're gonna get a 2-bedroom. You're gonna go, he just, his whole family is employed over there. They've sort of made it their home and they give back to it. I mean, Albuquerque is, yeah, I think the thing about it is that they steered into it like they steer into many things, where it's like, okay, we want to do Southern California. Now we're stuck with Albuquerque. Do we make Albuquerque look like Southern California, or do we just highlight what we find unique about Albuquerque?
Yeah.
And they did that, and they have entire like locations that are just going to make money forever, because one of the best show, or two of the best shows ever made, but one of the biggest shows made, has their locations over there.
Yeah.
I think that there might be a part of them that does like a short or something later on, but I strongly doubt that they're gonna really do anything more in this world. But I would have said the same thing after Breaking Bad,
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, I guess whatever the critics decide, I guess is kind of whatever they. I mean, they've earned a lot of trust.
It's tough because it is literally in the hands of the creatives. Because talking about Saul, like it's huge because it is a great show. It's big, but it's never been as popular, in any respect, and you would have to, like, lightning would have to strike. It would have to like change all of television in a huge way. When people go onto Netflix, people would have to like only be watching Saul. Like a lot of things would have to happen for it to be as big as Breaking Bad to people. So it's not necessarily anything where they're like Game of Thrones or Walking Dead, where they have to do a prequel because they're like, well, we have all these sets and all these costumes, so what are we going to do with them? And people want to see more.
Yeah.
Or even with The Good Wife. The Good Wife has a spinoff right now, and there's just it's because that show was still pretty big for CBS. I love both of them, but yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, you gave it 10 out of 10. This is cinema for Better Call Saul.
Yeah, I mean, Nick's rating too, man. I think it is just one of the most satisfying series on television. It's up there with Avatar: The Last Airbender and Breaking Bad, obviously, but like Avatar: The Last Airbender, I think everybody sort of got to. I was just as fire as I thought it was. There are a few people who are like, man, it all ended with Walter White killing some Nazis, or like the more misogynistic crew are like, he didn't kill Skylar and Skylar, like it's such a huge phenomenon though that there are people who you're gonna have your vocal Better Call Saul like, I don't know about that. They gave too many. It wasn't badass enough. What, we're gonna watch this dude get into a clown suit and it's gonna take like 4 seasons or whatever,